My name is Pastor Nero Patel. Welcome to today's discussion on the practice of Dorje Shugden. When first coming across Dorje Shugden, people are often confused as to the nature of the practice due to conflicting views. Some people view Dorje Shugden as an emanation of Manjushri, while others consider him a spirit or malevolent being. What is prevalent, however, is the notion that Dorje Shugden's practice is dangerous, as it causes harm to oneself and others, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Today we will be discussing the practice by examining if it is in fact dangerous, if it harms oneself or others, or if it is beneficial on our journey towards enlightenment. Today I am joined by Pastor David Lai and Pastor Kong Jinai. Pastor David, those who practice Dorje Shugden consider him an enlightened being. I was under the impression that all Buddhist practices are supposed to be beneficial. So why is Dorje Shugden's practice a harmful one?
No, it's not possible for Dorje Shugden to be harmful in any way, shape, or form. Why? It's because Dorje Shugden's practice was transmitted, was taught, was written about by great lineage lamas like Kapche Pabongka Rinpoche, Kapche Chijan Rinpoche, Kapche Song Rinpoche. Now you see, these are not ordinary lamas. These are lamas who are enlightened, fully awakened. And they are responsible for transmitting the teachings of not just Dorje Shugden. There's many, many teachings that they have delivered to the lamas, to the great lamas, the high lamas, to the geshes, the monks, the ordinary practitioners. So we are talking of teachings all the way from the Lam-Rim, stages of the path to enlightenment, from tantric teachings, three principal paths. There's so many teachings. And out of all these beneficial teachings, they've taught that Dorje Shugden is Manjushri. How can all this vast amount, corpus of teachings, that one little teaching on Dorje Shugden, they could have made a mistake. So it's not possible, okay? And then on the other hand, why would these awakened enlightened masters would make a mistake or would deliver a teaching that is harmful? It's not possible. It doesn't make sense. And then on the other hand, the way they delivered the teachings, the way they taught about Dorje Shugden is that it is a Dharma protected practice. It is a Buddhist practice. It is a practice that protects the practitioner, inner and outer. So it is not possible that they could have made a mistake or that they deliberately transmitted teachings that was harmful, okay? And just going back to your question, it is definitely not harmful at all, Dorje Shugden. It is based on the fact that his nature is that of Manjushri according to these lamas, and that these lamas are faultless in terms of their contribution, in terms of their conduct, their practice. It is faultless. And then in terms of the teachings was transmitted as a Dharma protector, a practice that protects, and a Buddhist practice. In whole history of Buddhism, there's not a single teaching by any lama, guru, that was meant to harm. Okay, so I hope I'm clear. Okay.
There have been some claims by people that the practice of Dorje Shugden actually harms the life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Pastor Gina, what are your thoughts on these claims?
What I would first say is that these claims are illogical and ridiculous, and I would like to answer your question based on three perspectives. The first perspective comes from that of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's attainments. The second one comes from the nature of Dorje Shugden and our examination of his nature. And the third answer to your question comes in the form of the perspective of His Holiness manifesting as a monk. Now, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it is said by all these people that his life is harmed when you rely on Dorje Shugden. But the very same people who say this will also tell you that His Holiness is a direct emanation of Avalokiteshvara, or the Buddha of compassion. And within the Tibetan tradition, he is known as Chenrezig. Now, in order to be considered a Buddha, a fully enlightened being, one must have exhausted all forms of karma, and therefore one does not experience any kind of suffering whatsoever. In order to experience harm, in order to have negative experiences, one must have the karma to do so. So if His Holiness the Dalai Lama is indeed a Buddha, as these people say, and he is Chenrezig, it means that he has no karma. If he has no karma, Therefore, he has no karma to receive harm. So he can't be harmed by any sentient being, let alone by Dorje Shugden. Now, my second answer to your question is from the perspective of Dorje Shugden's nature. Over the last 400 years of Dorje Shugden practice, many eminent scholars and attained masters, such as those mentioned by Pastor David earlier, have examined Dorje Shugden's nature, and they've all come to the same conclusion, which is that Dorje Shugden is Manjushri, he is a Buddha. It does not make sense to say that Dorje Shugden as a Buddha would want to harm the life of another Buddha, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is Chenrezig. In fact, it's also been very well documented that during the political troubles of 1959, it was actually Dorje Shugden who saved His Holiness's life. It was Dorje Shugden who advised His Holiness to leave Tibet to go to India, and even provided the route and the map and the direction that His Holiness should take. Why would anyone want to rescue and save someone's life only to endanger it later? To make a statement like that is not logical at all. Now, my third and final answer to your question comes from the perspective of His Holiness's manifestation as a monk. His Holiness always humbly insists that he's a simple monk. Now, Buddha Shakyamuni himself said that if you take your ordination vows and you wear the monk robes and you hold your vows well, you are protected from rebirth in the three lower realms, as well as protected from all classes and all forms of spirit or spirit disturbances and any kind of negative interferences. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a monk. So it does not make sense to say that His Holiness as a monk who is holding his vows would be able to be harmed by a spirit. You know, if Dorje Shugden were a spirit, which he is not, how can he harm someone who's holding his monk vows and wearing the monk robes well?
Okay, thank you for that explanation, Pastor Jinai. So let's take a look at the issue from another angle. Some people claim that there is proof that the practice of Dorje Shugden increases segregation and increases negative qualities in one's mind. For example, the murder of Geshe Losang Gyatso in 1997, along with his two students, after he encouraged people to stop practicing Dorje Shugden. People take this as proof that Dorje Shugden's practice increases negative qualities and thoughts within one's mind. What are your views on this?
There's just one case in the late 90s, and people have been using this case over and over across time. And you cannot use one case to brand all practitioners of Dorje Shugden as murderers or potential murderers. It doesn't make sense. It's ridiculous, actually. This is like saying that if there's ex-terrorists out there, and then they are using their religion of Y, and they use the name of that religion Y to kill people, and because of that one terrorist group, let's say, it's because of them, and you blame the entire religion of Y. So it doesn't make sense that just because a person have this so-and-so faith, because there's so many people who are murderers out there. I am so sorry, but that's the truth. There's a lot of people who commit crime, and they may use or may not use their faith as a reason for their murder, but that doesn't mean the religion, their faith, is the cause of their action. It does not make sense. Nobody in the right frame of mind would say that. That is just superstition, I would say. Okay, and on top of that, Dorje Shugden's practice is delivered and transmitted in such a way to remove negativities, to remove anger, hatred, desire, ignorance. It is to remove them. So why would the practice encourage violent actions, violent thoughts? It does not make sense, again. Okay, I hope I'm clear on this.
Pastor David, you mentioned that Dorje Shugden's practice is supposed to remove your negative qualities, but how do you explain this given the violence within Dorje Shugden's practice? I mean, in Dorje Shugden's prayers, it says, kill one's enemy, and has a lot of other violent imagery. If Dorje Shugden's practice is not dangerous or harmful, why does it include so much violent imagery?
That's a very good question, actually. This is not unique of Dorje Shugden's practice. This is actually quite common among all the many Dharma protectors to have that kind of imagery in their liturgies. And you must understand the purpose of this imagery, which it's termed as tantric imagery. So what happened is the enemy that the liturgy focuses on is not an external enemy. It is not a person that we actually hate, really hate. It's not. It is an internal enemy. It is a symbolic enemy within. So what's the enemy? The enemy is the negative emotions, ignorance, hatred, desire, the negativities within us, the negative karma, the karma that creates us, the thoughts and actions that makes us suffer, that creates more negative karma. So it is that enemy that Dorje Shugden is focusing on, okay? And then on top of that, there is some people saying about Dorje Shugden looking, violent, militant with the sword and all that. So that aspect of physical appearance of Dorje Shugden is also not unique of Dorje Shugden himself. There are many Yidams, Dharma protectors, Buddhas who appear in a wrathful form. And wrath in Buddhism is symbolic. It is symbolic of extreme compassion. It is symbolic of destruction of negative karma, of negativities within ourselves, not an external, a person that we hate. It is not that at all. So there's a case in Tibet of a Buddha who had an appearance of, I would say, comparatively more violent than Dorje Shugden. For example, Yamantaka. Yamantaka is an established practice today. But when it was first introduced in Tibet by Ralotsawa, it was scary to everybody. They thought, how can this be a Buddha, with all the arms and all the weapons and a face of a bull? No one actually thought it was a Buddha. And when Ralotsawa thought, people had a lot of resistance to it. But as the Lamas introduced and as people practice, they realized the qualities. And because of that, Yamantaka is an established practice today. So I go back to your question. The tantric imagery, both external in the physical appearance of Dorje Shugden and in the liturgy, it is to attack the internal enemy. It is to remove negativities. It is that. It is not to foster any violence, anger, or any negative thoughts. It is not that. It is the opposite. So when people understand and it is introduced and it's taught, then they will know. And on top of that, it is common. It is not just Dorje Shugden. There are many other Dharma protectors. And people accept that. So I don't see why they cannot accept Dorje Shugden as being with the imagery and the way he's described in the text. For example, there is this imagery of Kalarupa used in the liturgy in one of his praise, in which the practitioner requests Kalarupa to smash to dust motes the enemy of the teachings. So you can see that the comparison between the imagery of Dorje Shugden and Kalarupa, they are violent, but it is symbolic. So comparatively, Dorje Shugden's liturgy is quite mild, actually, I would say. So it is quite clear that it is totally, this whole thing about imagery and all, it's symbolic. It is meant to request the Dharma protector to remove negativities, not foster any violent or angry thoughts, okay? So I just want to be clear about that.
Thank you, Pastor David, for clearing that up. Now, Dorje Shugden is also known as a wealth god. And as such, logically speaking, his practice would increase materialism. Now, doesn't materialism go against the Buddhist principle of renunciation? And wouldn't this be dangerous on the Buddhist path? Pastor Jina, your thoughts?
First of all, Pastor Nero, I would like to clarify that Dorje Shugden is a fully enlightened Dharma protector and he's not a wealth god. The people who refer to Dorje Shugden as a wealth god are doing it to be derogatory. They're referring to him as a wealth god who was basically still within samsara and still subjected to the laws of karma and rebirth, and that he is somehow only going to grant you wealth if you please him by making propitiations, by making offerings to him, by offering praises to him, and that he does so when he's pleased with you and he grants you these boons of wealth. Now, The people who say that Dorje Shugden is a wealth god, what they don't understand is how the practice of Dorje Shugden can result in wealth and why it results in wealth. You're right, materialism in the Buddhist tradition is wrong, is discouraged, but Dorje Shugden's practice, because he is a fully enlightened Buddha, does not actually result in materialism and does not encourage materialism. The fact that Dorje Shugden can function as a wealth protector is more a reflection of our motivation as practitioners. As an enlightened Dharma protector, Dorje Shugden uses what we are interested in to draw us, to attract us to the Dharma. Now, in this day and age, most practitioners are not interested in temples, they're not interested in spirituality. What most practitioners are interested in these days is wealth, money, in long life, in good health, in having children, having families, furthering our career, etc. So people may come to Dorje Shugden at the beginning to receive material benefit, but the longer they stay connected with him, the greater their exposure to the Lamrim teachings and to Lojong mind transformation, to the 50 stanzas of Guru devotion. With this greater exposure, with this greater time and connection with Dorje Shugden, they have a greater opportunity to understand, to practice, and to gain a deeper understanding of Dharma. And in that way, their motivation transforms from something that's more secular to something that's higher. Now, that's my first reason, my first explanation for why Dorje Shugden is a Dharma protector and not a wealth god. Okay, my second reason is that most people today are lay practitioners who want to engage in spiritual practice, but they have all kinds of secular commitments, and these create obstacles towards their spiritual development. How many times, Pastor Niral, have you heard people say that they can't come to a Dharma teaching or they can't do more retreats because they have to work, because they have bills to pay? You know? So it's these kind of commitments that they've made prior to meeting the Dharma that becomes obstacles towards their deeper spiritual practice. Now, as an enlightened Dharma protector, Dorje Shugden clears these obstacles for us. He increases our resources in order to create these kind of conducive conditions so that when our minds are not distracted with having to fulfill these commitments, that we can redirect our mind, our energy, and our focus into deeper spiritual practice. As an enlightened Dharma protector, Dorje Shugden's only motivation is for us to engage in deeper spiritual practice. So he will only assist us with increasing resources when it actually benefits our practice. He will not assist us in increasing our wealth when this wealth and this increase of resources actually draws us away from spirituality. Because when we gain the financial ability to actually engage in non-virtuous actions, that's when we get distracted from our spiritual path.
Pastor Jinai, you mentioned that Dorje Shugden is an enlightened Dharma protector, and one of his roles is to help clear possible financial obstacles that we may have in order to help us on our spiritual path. But what about other Dharma protectors?
You're right. As I mentioned before, Dorje Shugden does help to clear these obstacles on our spiritual path. And people say that because Dorje Shugden's practitioners experience secular benefits, that this makes him a spirit and that this makes his practice dangerous. Well, what I would like to ask these people back very respectfully is that would they call other Dharma protectors like Satrap and Mahakala, Hayagriva, Pandan Lamo, Kalarupa, would they call these Dharma protectors spirits as well, because their devotees also experience secular benefits? Should these Dharma protectors stop assisting their practitioners and stop clearing their practitioners' secular obstacles, which would actually give them more time to focus on their spiritual practice? If these Dharma protectors did that, it wouldn't make them very effective Dharma protectors. And you don't even have to talk about Dharma protectors. Let's look at other wealth practices within Tibetan Buddhism. For example, Buddhas like Dambala or like Vashravana, or known as Namtose in the Tibetan tradition. So in answer to your question, is Dorje Shugden's practice dangerous because he appears as a wealth god? No, it is not. Dorje Shugden only uses what we as practitioners are attracted to in order to bring us to the Dharma. But once we have greater exposure, once we have greater understanding of the Dharma, that's when our motivation actually changes. So in no way, shape or form can an enlightened Dharma protector, who is an emanation of Manjushri, harm us in any way. He only grants us wealth when it benefits us, and that's because of his enlightened nature, his mind as Manjushri.
Thank you, Pastor Jinai. I'd like to come at the discussion from another angle now. Say if somebody is already practicing Dorje Shugden, it is said that if the person stops practicing Dorje Shugden, he's going to get angry, and due to that anger, he will harm the person who has stopped his practice. Is this the case, Pastor David?
No, it's not possible. We've already established earlier in this discussion that Dorje Shugden is an emanation of Manjushri. Now, why would Manjushri harm you or anyone? He's supposed to be a Buddha. He's supposed to have compassion. He is. He does. And then, this brings to mind, I've heard recently, in this climate of discrimination, of the Shugden issue, in the monastery, when Dorje Shugden takes trance in the oracle, he always tells his practitioners, the high lamas, the monks, he tells them, be patient. Now, this doesn't sound like a Dharma protector who is vengeful, who is vindictive, who will harm you if you stop the practice. He's not. And then, however, on the other hand, what happens is, if you give up the practice, there is harm, but it's not from Dorje Shugden. It comes from your own karma. Why? It's because in receiving the practice, in doing Dorje Shugden's practice, you receive it from your Lama. A Lama who has given it to you, and you have forged a spiritual bond by engaging in Dorje Shugden's practice. Okay? It is this spiritual bond that is broken because you've given up practice that will come back and harm you. And it is the broken commitments. It is a negative repercussion from that is harmful. Okay, that's one. Then another thing is, the other aspect is, Dorje Shugden, while you were practicing Dorje Shugden, you have been requesting him to remove your obstacles. Over time, what happened is Dorje Shugden has held back a lot of negative karma. You see, all of us have a lot of negative karma from this and previous lives, and it is a lot, it is heavy. And so what happens is Dorje Shugden very kindly holds back a lot of negative karma from ripening. He cannot remove the negative karma immediately, but he can hold it from ripening so that when we engage in the practice, we engage in purification, we are able to purify it eventually. So Dorje Shugden has been very kind. And although he wants to, but he cannot help us anymore because we have given up the practice. So I'm trying to establish here that the harm is not from Dorje Shugden. The harm is from when we've given up the practice and Dorje Shugden is unable to assist us anymore. You see, you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Pastor David. Pastor Jinai, there's a claim that if you still practice Dorje Shugden, you actually break your samaya with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Can you explain a bit more about this?
Okay, first thing that we need to do is we need to explain what samaya is. We need to define samaya. Now, samaya or damzik in Tibetan is the link or relationship between a student and a teacher. This bond is formed after a period of observation from teacher to student and from student to teacher. And how long this period of observation lasts for is dependent on the karmic affinity between teacher and disciple. So when a samaya is formed is when a student takes refuge with a teacher and takes on vows from the teacher, whether it is refuge vows or bodhisattva vows, tantric vows or ordination vows. What characterizes clean samaya between a student and a teacher is when there's integrity and trust in the relationship. So what do I mean by integrity? What I mean by integrity is you do what you say you're going to do. So you keep your commitments, you uphold your commitments, you keep your vows, and you fulfill all assignments that your teacher gives you, all commitments that your teacher gives you, and you take all instructions from your teacher as personal advice, whether these instructions are given directly or indirectly. Now, maintaining samaya is extremely important because our relationship with our guru is the foundation of all good qualities that we can develop. And when we are in the earliest stages of our practice, putting effort into maintaining good samaya with our teachers and keeping our commitments is good training for when we receive higher practices. When we keep breaking our samaya, why is it so important? It's because when we keep breaking our samaya, it slows down the process of us being able to receive these higher tantric practices, which rely on us having good samaya. We also disappoint our teacher who's been kinder to us than our own mothers. Let's not talk about things from a scripture point of view where you are disappointing your root guru, but we talk about it human to human. It's just not nice when you disappoint someone who cares about you and who you care about over and over again.
Pastor Jinai, you've defined what samaya is, but what does it have to do with the practice of Dorje Shugden?
Okay, that's a very good question. As you know, as Buddhists, regardless of what school of thought or tradition you come from, the core practice for all Buddhists around the world is the teachings on karma. So if creating and maintaining a positive relationship with our teachers can generate positive results, then when we break our relationship with our teacher degenerates, then we experience the opposite result, which is negative karma. Negative karma accumulates. So the harm that you experience when you give up your practice of Dorje Shugden doesn't come from the side of Dorje Shugden himself. It's not that you lapsed in your practice and Dorje Shugden comes bearing down on you to take revenge. He's not harmful in that way at all. When you break your commitment and when you break your samaya, you accumulate the negative karma such that you eventually experience it because this negative karma manifests. Now, the negative experience that you get from giving up Dorje Shugden's practice doesn't come from Dorje Shugden himself. It comes from breaking your samaya and breaking your commitment to your teacher. It just so happens in this case, it was done in relation to you giving up your Dorje Shugden practice. The same would apply if you gave up your Tara practice, for example, or any other Yidam practice. It's because you broke your commitment to maintain this practice. The same will also occur if you broke your samaya with any other teacher, whether or not they rely on Dorje Shugden or they practice Dorje Shugden, because again, it's about breaking samaya. Now, in this day and age, most people don't have samaya with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. They have not received teachings directly from him. They have not received practices directly from him. So when you keep your practice of Dorje Shugden, you don't break your samaya with His Holiness if there is no samaya to break. It's not possible to break something that doesn't exist.
Thank you, Pastor Jinai. There are some cases in which people practice Dorje Shugden, but also have His Holiness the Dalai Lama as one of their teachers. What advice would you give them?
The simplest advice I will give is to always follow what your root guru tells you. Now, if your root guru is His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and His Holiness tells you to give up Dorje Shugden, then give up the practice on the basis of maintaining your samaya with your root guru. But for many people, they met their root guru before they met His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in those cases where their root gurus gave them the practice of Dorje Shugden, it is advisable that they maintain their practice and they maintain their commitments on the basis of keeping the samaya with their root guru, with their teacher. His Holiness is a great Buddhist teacher and a master of philosophy, and his works have benefited countless beings around the world. But it doesn't mean that everyone has to conform to His Holiness's view, especially if His Holiness is not the root guru. There are many great masters within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition from different schools who have entirely valid points of view and teachings. So it always goes back to returning to your relationship with your root guru and doing your best to keep clean samaya with your teacher.
Dorje Shugden is known primarily as a Gelugpa Dharma protector. Can anybody else practice Dorje Shugden without fear of being harmed?
It's definitely possible for people who are not of the Gelug tradition to practice Dorje Shugden. You see, as Pastor David and I have mentioned many times in the course of this discussion, Dorje Shugden's nature is that of Manjushri. It's that of a fully enlightened Buddha, and therefore it's not within his nature to bring harm to anyone. So from that basis, if anyone wishes to practice Dorje Shugden or to rely on him, he would definitely accept and assist them, regardless of their race, their religion, their culture, their creed or their background. Dorje Shugden is without ego and he's without self-cherishing mind. And since he doesn't have a self-cherishing mind, he has no self-interest or anything to protect or defend. So everything he does can never ever bring any kind of harm to you. And it's just not in his nature to harm anyone. It's just not in Manjushri's nature to harm anyone, because he is wisdom, he is compassion, he is a fully enlightened Buddha. So of course, if you have a teacher, seek their permission first, because as I mentioned earlier, our root guru's instructions and advice to us supersedes everything. Our root guru has kindly given us a specific set of practices and instructions to train us. And so it is just respectful of our relationship with our teacher to receive their permission before we rely on Dorje Shugden. Now, you don't have to be Gelugpa to practice or to rely on Dorje Shugden. Historically, it's been very well recorded that Dorje Shugden has been relied upon as a Dharma protector in all the other traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. And in fact, within the Gelug set of liturgies today, there are many contributions and prayers from particularly the Sakya and the Kagyu schools of Buddhism. If a Gelug can recite a Sakya prayer to request for Dorje Shugden's assistance, it means that he has no bias from his side towards any tradition or lineage. What matters the most is your sincerity, and what matters the most is our clean samaya with our gurus.
Pastor David, Pastor Jinai has just told us that anybody can rely upon Dorje Shugden. But I wanted to ask you, what is Sokte? And how does this have an impact on people's reliance on Dorje Shugden?
Okay, let me begin first by explaining what Sokte is. Sokte is a Tibetan term to mean life entrustment, initiation. In this case, it's of Dorje Shugden, okay? So the Lama who initiates you takes your hand, takes Dorje Shugden's hand, symbolically, of course, in the liturgy, puts them together and makes this spiritual commitment between you and the Dharma protector, that the Dharma protector will assist you until you achieve full bodhicitta, full compassion, full enlightenment. And you will have the spiritual commitments to practice Dorje Shugden and so forth. You know, there's spiritual commitments to perpetuate Dorje Shugden, basically. So what happened is this commitment is the one that if you break, there'll be repercussions. So you have made the commitment, and so it is a binding spiritual commitment that will have repercussion if you break it. It is not Dorje Shugden. Dorje Shugden will always be full of compassion, always want to assist. And then on the other hand, if you do not have life entrustment, do not have Sokte, and if you find a prayer online that is of an authentic source, and you recite it and you do it, and you know when you need help, or you want to do it on a daily basis as a spiritual practice, it is totally safe. Dorje Shugden is Manjushri. Dorje Shugden is a Dharma protector. His function, role and function is to protect. So it is totally safe in this case. In both cases, in fact. It is our commitment that we break that is harmful. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Pastor David. Throughout today's discussion, it has been made quite clear that from the perspective of Buddhist practice and logic, that Dorje Shugden is actually a fully enlightened being, an emanation of Manjushri, rather than a spirit. This is supported by many great masters of the past who advocated the practice of Dorje Shugden. These masters would never have advocated practices that were harmful because this would contradict the Buddhist teachings. In fact, as we have heard, the practice of Dorje Shugden is beneficial in one's spiritual journey. It is often argued that the language used in Dorje Shugden's prayers is an exhortation for physical violence, but if understood correctly, we realize that the practice actually guides us to comprehending that our real enemy is in fact our negative karma and negative qualities. This is a common theme throughout the practices of many Dharma protectors and in no way is limited to Dorje Shugden's practice. This practice in no way seeks to increase one's negative qualities or attitude, but in fact aids in curbing them. A fully enlightened being cannot harm another being. Therefore, the practice of Dorje Shugden, though misunderstood, is definitely not a dangerous one and cannot harm you, but actually grants benefits along one's spiritual journey. With that, I would like to thank Pastor David Lai and Pastor Kong Jinai for joining me for today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.